Alright, here's how a $500 loan to my friend Tom has turned into this unexpected tension and awkwardness that I still can't wrap my head around. Tom and I go way back, so when he called me up one day, stressed about his car breaking down and needing $500 for repairs, I didn't hesitate. He assured me he'd pay me back by the end of the month, and I figured I could go without the money for a few weeks to help him out. After all, he'd done plenty of favors for me over the years, and I trusted him to keep his word. But, of course, a few weeks turned into a couple of months, and there was no mention of paying me back. At first, I tried to be understanding. Life happens, right? I know he's had some tough breaks lately. But then, I started noticing little things that didn't sit well. I'd see him on Instagram sharing stories from concerts, weekend getaways, and new clothes he'd bought. Meanwhile, I was cutting back on my own spending to make up for the missing $500, feeling like I was being played. I finally decided to reach out, trying to keep it light. I texted him something like, "Hey, any chance you'll be able to pay me back soon? Just trying to balance my budget here." He responded right away, saying, "Oh man, sorry. Things have been crazy. I'll get it to you soon." But there was no actual timeline or offer to start with even a small payment. Another month went by with radio silence, and by then, I was getting frustrated. So, I texted him again, more directly this time. "Hey Tom, I really need that loan back. Even if you can't do the full amount, a partial payment would really help." He replied a few hours later with, "I'm working on it, dude, I promise. Just be patient." Fast forward to last weekend, and a group of us were out for a friend's birthday. Tom showed up late, carrying this huge shopping bag from some designer store, talking about the crazy deals he'd scored on new shoes. He proceeded to buy drinks for the table, insisting that it was on him, and even ordered himself an expensive dinner. I was sitting there, trying not to lose it, feeling like I was funding his night out while I was skimping on my own expenses. After a couple of drinks, I couldn't help myself. I leaned over and said, as casually as I could, "Wow, looks like things are going well for you. Does this mean you're ready to pay me back?" Tom's face went blank, and he shot me this look of pure annoyance. He leaned in and muttered, "Really, dude? You're gonna bring that up here?" He told me I was making things weird and that real friends don't stress each other out over money. I tried to explain that it wasn't about stressing him out. It was about the fact that I was waiting on money he seemed to be spending elsewhere. He just shook his head and said, "Honestly, I thought you'd be cool about this." Since then, things have been tense between us. Tom's barely speaking to me, and I've heard from mutual friends that he thinks I overreacted and was rude to bring it up in front of everyone. A few of them even told me I should have just given him more time and not asked for it publicly, but I'm sitting here feeling like I've been more than patient. So now, I'm left wondering if I did something wrong by bringing it up, or if he's just taking advantage of the fact that I trusted him. Alright, here's what happened at my friend Ben's going away party last weekend. I thought I was just contributing to the conversation, but now it seems like everyone thinks I ruined the vibe, so I could use a little perspective here. Ben and I have been friends since high school, and he's a good guy, if maybe a bit of a dreamer. He's always talking about his big plans and adventures without always following through. So when he announced he was moving to New York for a job, I was genuinely happy for him, but also a little skeptical. He'd been applying for positions in the city for a while, but he landed this one through a friend of a friend. It's a startup gig, a little shaky if you ask me, but he was really excited about it, so I went with it. The party was at his favorite bar, and it was packed. Everyone was celebrating, hyping him up, talking about how he was going to take over New York and how it was such a big step. I was happy for him, sure, but I couldn't help but feel like everyone was a little over the top. I mean, it's not like he's moving there to start his own company or something. He's just taking an entry-level job in a high-rent city. After a few drinks, his mom started giving a speech, going on about how proud she was of him for chasing his dreams, and how he's always been destined for something bigger. Everyone started clapping and cheering, and it was honestly sweet. But when it was my turn to speak, I felt like maybe someone should add a bit of a grounding perspective, you know? So I raised my glass and said, "Here's to Ben. New York's a tough city, and not everyone makes it. But if anyone can handle it, it's you. Just remember to take it one step at a time. Don't get too ahead of yourself." There was a bit of awkward laughter, and I could see a few people glancing at each other. Ben's smile got a little strained, but I thought maybe he just wasn't expecting me to keep it real. I wasn't trying to bring down the mood, I just figured it was better to remind him that it's okay to take things slow instead of getting overwhelmed by all the hype. Later on, Ben was talking with a group of us about his plans and how he was excited to live in the city, meet new people, and build his career there. He mentioned that he hoped to work his way up and maybe even start his own business someday. Everyone was cheering him on, saying things like, "You're going to kill it," and "Can't wait to see you at the top." I couldn't help but add, "Hey, just remember to keep a backup plan, all right?" New York's an expensive place, and startups aren't exactly known for job security. I laughed, hoping he'd take it as friendly advice, but he just nodded and said, "Yeah, I know." The energy around us felt a little off after that, so I figured maybe everyone just wasn't in the mood to be practical. As the night went on, his friends kept hyping him up, taking pictures, and making plans to come visit him in New York. At one point, someone joked, "Ben's going to be the next big thing. Don't forget us when you're famous." Everyone laughed, and Ben was grinning, clearly loving the attention. I felt like maybe someone needed to balance things out a little, so I added, "Just don't be surprised if New York chews you up a bit first. It's a great city, but it's not as glamorous as people think. Just keep your expectations realistic." A couple of people looked at me, and Ben kind of chuckled, but I could tell he wasn't as excited anymore. His girlfriend gave me a look, like, "Why are you even saying this?" But I honestly thought I was helping. Isn't it better to go in prepared than to get blindsided by reality? Towards the end of the night, Ben's best friend started another toast, saying how proud we all were and how we were sure Ben was going to conquer the city. When everyone raised their glasses, I figured I'd add a quick final thought. I said, "Here's to Ben. Just remember, if things don't work out, you can always come back." Nothing wrong with that. This time, I could tell immediately that I'd crossed a line. The laughter was definitely more uncomfortable, and Ben gave me this tight smile before clinking glasses and looking away. A few minutes later, his girlfriend pulled me aside and said, "Do you have to keep saying stuff like that? This is supposed to be an encouraging send-off, not a reality check." I tried to explain, "I'm just looking out for him. New York isn't easy, and I don't want him to go in with rose-colored glasses." But she just shook her head and said, "Tonight's not about being realistic. It's about celebrating his new chapter. Can't you just be happy for him?" I felt a little blindsided because I am happy for him. I told her, "I am happy for him. I'm just not going to pretend it's all going to be a cakewalk. He deserves to know what he's getting into." She didn't respond and just went back to join the others. By the end of the night, Ben barely talked to me. When I tried to say goodbye and wish him good luck, he just said thanks without even making eye contact. I honestly felt confused. I thought I was being a good friend by reminding him that New York can be tough and that he should be prepared. But now, I'm hearing from other friends that I ruined the vibe of his party and that I should have just let him enjoy the night. Was it really so wrong to give him a little practical advice when everyone else was acting like he was moving there to become a superstar? So, AITA for giving him a dose of reality at his going-away party. Or was I just being a good friend? It was my dad this time. He's always been the steady one in the family, the kind of guy who rarely shows much emotion but always seems to have everything under control. Growing up, I can't remember a single moment where he wasn't there, calmly handling whatever life threw at us. He's a rock, you know? The one who never needs anything from anyone. Or so I thought. Lately, though, I noticed some cracks. He'd been distant, distracted, even forgetful, which was so unlike him. At first, I assumed it was just stress from his job, but little things kept piling up. Missed phone calls, bills left on the counter, nights where he'd barely pick at his food. It was unsettling, but I kept telling myself he'd come to me if he needed anything. After all, this was Dad. He never let things get out of hand. Then, last week, I was over at his place helping him with some yard work. We went inside for a quick water break, and while he was in the other room, I noticed an official-looking envelope sitting on the coffee table. My curiosity got the best of me, and I glanced at it. It was a foreclosure notice. My stomach dropped. I couldn't believe it. Dad had owned the house for decades. He was so careful with money. How could things have gotten this bad without him telling me? I sat there, staring at that envelope, trying to wrap my mind around it. It wasn't just about the money. It was the realization that he'd been struggling alone, quietly, for who knows how long. When he came back, I took a deep breath and decided to bring it up. "Dad, I saw the notice on the table. Is everything okay with the house? Are you behind on the payments? His face hardened, a flash of anger crossing his eyes. You were looking at my mail? No, it was just sitting there, I said, feeling defensive but trying to keep my voice calm. I couldn't help but notice. I didn't mean to pry, but I'm worried. If things are rough right now, maybe I can help out. I've got some savings. I could cover a couple payments, give you some breathing room. His jaw clenched, and he looked away, his shoulders tensing. I don't need your help, all right? I've been taking care of this house long before you were born. I know that, Dad, I said, swallowing hard. I'm not saying you can't handle it, but maybe you don't have to handle it all by yourself. He let out a bitter laugh. You think I'm some charity case now? That just because you're all grown up, you need to step in and rescue your old man? That's not it at all, I said, the frustration and hurt creeping into my voice. I just don't want you to struggle alone. You've been there for me my whole life, and now it's my turn to be there for you. But he shook his head, his face set in that stubborn way that told me he'd made up his mind. Well, maybe I don't need anyone to be there for me. I've handled worse before, and I don't need my own son telling me how to live my life. The words hit me harder than I expected. I thought I was offering him a way out, a way to lighten the load, but it was clear he saw it differently. Instead of feeling supported, he felt undermined, as if my offer was an accusation that he'd lost control. After a long, tense silence, I managed to mumble, "All right, I'm sorry, Dad. I didn't mean to make you feel like I don't trust you. I just wanted to help." He nodded, still not meeting my eyes. "Just let it go, okay? I'll take care of it." I left feeling defeated, wondering how my attempt to help had backfired so completely. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, second-guessing everything I'd said, wondering if I'd only made things worse by bringing it up. I wanted to be there for him, to show him he wasn't alone. But maybe my help just felt like a reminder of what he didn't want to admit to anyone, especially not his own son. Now I'm left with this gnawing guilt, wondering if I overstepped by even offering. Should I have just let him handle things his way, no matter how bad it might? So, this all started when my sister asked me to dog sit for her, while she and her husband went on vacation. They've been planning this big, overseas trip for their anniversary, and they'd be gone for 2 weeks. Now, don't get me wrong, I love dogs, and I have a good relationship with my sister's dog. But this was 2 weeks, and she wanted me to actually move into their house to keep the dog in its routine. Plus, they live almost an hour away from me, so this would basically mean putting my own life on hold for 2 weeks. When she first asked, I said I'd think about it, but that it might be tough with my work and personal commitments. I offered to check in on the dog every couple of days instead, but she insisted that wasn't enough. She went on about how if you truly cared, you'd do this, and how the dog would be so much happier if I could just stay there. She even suggested that I could work remotely from her place, like it would be no big deal to uproot myself and camp out at her house for 2 weeks just because she wanted me to. I finally told her I couldn't do it. I explained that I had too much going on, and 2 weeks was just too long for me to commit to staying at her place. I said I could help find a dog sitter if she needed, or even pitch in to cover a kennel if it came to that. But she was not happy. She went off about how she couldn't believe I'd abandoned her when she needed me, and how family was supposed to be there for each other. She even pulled the "I'd do it for you" in a heartbeat card. At that point, I was getting annoyed. I felt like she was asking for a lot, and I'd already offered alternatives. But she kept saying that I just didn't get it, and that she was hurt. I wasn't willing to make this sacrifice for her. She finally hung up, saying, "I hope you realize how much this has hurt me." I thought she'd cool down, but then she told our parents about it, and they both called to lecture me about family obligations. My mom told me how disappointed she was, and my dad kept hinting that it wouldn't kill me to do something nice for my sister. They all acted like I'd committed some huge betrayal by saying no. The day before her trip, my sister called me again and asked if I'd reconsidered. By then, I'd already moved on, and I stuck to my original answer. She left for her vacation furious with me, and ended up paying a small fortune to put the dog in a kennel. When she got back, she barely spoke to me and was clearly still upset. She told me the dog had been stressed, and that it was my fault for forcing her to leave him in a kennel. Since then, my family has made me out to be the selfish one who refuses to support family. Every time we talk, someone brings up the dog sitting thing, saying I could have easily made it work if I'd just tried a little harder. Even some of my friends, when I told them, said I should have just gone and done it to keep the peace. Now I'm wondering if I made the wrong call, but at the time, it felt like they were asking way too much. I love my family, but I also think there should be boundaries, even if it means disappointing people. So, my family has this tradition of spending Christmas at my aunt's cozy cabin up in the mountains. It's a classic scene. Logs crackling in the fireplace, handmade ornaments on a scruffy old tree, and a bunch of mismatched chairs around the dinner table. Everyone pitches in with the cooking and decorating, and it's always been a laid-back, casual time where we just enjoy each other's company. This year, my aunt asked me to help organize the trip since she was dealing with a hectic schedule. I was excited for the chance to make it memorable, and I figured, why not upgrade the whole experience? I've been looking at these big, gorgeous vacation homes online. Think floor-to-ceiling windows, designer kitchens, rooms for everyone, and hot tubs out back. I thought it would be amazing to give my family a luxury Christmas, so I went ahead and booked this stunning mountain chalet. I didn't tell anyone about the switch, thinking it would be a fun surprise. My plan was to bring everyone to the cabin and then say, surprise! We're actually staying somewhere incredible this year. In my mind, it was going to be this magical reveal like in a Christmas movie. When everyone arrived on Christmas Eve, I broke the news. I told them we wouldn't be staying at the usual cabin and instead had a once-in-a-lifetime place for the holidays. I was practically bursting with excitement as I showed them pictures of the huge chalet with its modern decor, gourmet kitchen, and panoramic views. But instead of excitement, I was met with a lot of confusion. My mom was the first to say something. But what about the cabin? We always spend Christmas there. My cousin looked uncomfortable and said, I kind of like the old place. It's part of our tradition. I brushed off their concerns, saying, come on, you guys. This place is beautiful. It has way more space, so no one has to sleep on an air mattress. We've got a fully stocked kitchen, a hot tub, and an actual tree that doesn't look like it's about to fall apart. My dad chimed in, looking a little disappointed. I don't mind sleeping on an air mattress. That's part of the experience. Plus, all the decorations we put up each year are already at the cabin. The new place won't feel the same, but I was determined. You'll all love it once you see it. This is going to be a Christmas we'll never forget. When we arrived at the chalet, it was everything I had imagined. Immaculate, with elegant decorations and soft jazz playing over the speakers. I was sure everyone would be blown away, but instead they just kind of stood around looking out of place. My aunt, who usually hosts, was the first to voice her feelings. It's beautiful, but it doesn't feel like us. I miss the warmth of the old cabin. She pointed to the decor, which was chic but lacked any of our family's usual ornaments and little handmade crafts. I tried to reassure her, but this place is so much nicer. We have space to relax, and we're still together. Isn't that what matters? My mom shook her head, looking sad. It's just it feels like we're guests in someone else's home, not our own. The cabin may be a little old and small, but it's ours. We know every corner of that place, every scratch on the table, and every ornament we've hung for years. This place is nice, but it's not our Christmas. The rest of the night felt awkward. My family tried to settle in, but it was clear no one was comfortable. No one wanted to start decorating or even put on the Christmas movie we usually watched. They just sat around, picking at their food and looking at their phones. My dad even joked, well, at least we don't have to worry about the usual plumbing issues, but no one laughed. The next morning, when it was time to open presents, my cousin quietly asked if we could head to the old cabin, just for a few hours, to have real Christmas. I was shocked. We got everything here. Why would you want to drive all the way back? But she just shrugged and said, it doesn't feel right to be anywhere else. Eventually, I gave in, and we all drove back to the cabin. As soon as we walked through the door, everyone's mood changed. They were smiling, grabbing their favorite mugs, putting on our old Christmas music playlist, and talking over each other about where to hang the stockings. It was like I'd been transported back to our usual family Christmas, and I finally started to understand what they meant. As I watched my family laughing and decorating, I realized I'd missed the point. I wanted to make Christmas fancy and memorable, but they didn't need anything special to have a great time. They just wanted to be in a place that felt like home. even if it meant squeezing into a tiny cabin with creaky floors and old decorations. Now, I can't shake this nagging feeling that I overstepped by changing everything without asking. I thought I was doing something special, but maybe I missed the magic of what we already had. So, AITA for trying to upgrade Christmas? A few months back, my friend Mark reached out to me in a total panic. We'd been close in college, though we'd drifted apart over the years, staying in touch mostly through social media. He explained that he'd lost his job and couldn't afford rent anymore. His relationship had recently ended too, so he was feeling stuck with nowhere to go. He asked if he could stay with me just for a few weeks while he looked for a new job and got back on his feet. I have a steady job and a decent apartment with a guest room, and I'd known Mark to be a good guy back in the day, so I thought, why not? I wanted to help him out, and it felt like a chance to reconnect. I cleaned up the guest room, stocked up on groceries, and even made a little welcome basket with some snacks and essentials to make him feel comfortable. When he arrived, he seemed genuinely thankful, hugged me, and promised he'd be out as soon as he could. The first week went smoothly. He'd go out every day, saying he was meeting with recruiters or filling out applications in person. We'd catch up in the evenings over dinner, and he'd talk about all the places he'd applied to and how he had some promising leads. It was kind of nice having someone around, and I was happy to be able to support him. But by week 2, things started to change. He began sleeping in later and later, saying he was waiting to hear back from a few places. He stopped going out as much, spending most of his days on my couch in sweatpants, scrolling on his phone or watching TV. When I'd ask how the job search was going, he'd say things like, "It's all online these days, no need to go out," or "The right opportunity will come along." Then the mess started piling up. He'd leave dishes in the sink, food wrappers on the couch, and piles of his clothes around the living room. My apartment, which I'd always kept neat, started feeling more like a college dorm. I'd find half-finished cans of soda on every table, and the bathroom looked like a tornado had hit it. When I politely asked him to clean up a bit, he'd just say, "Oh yeah, sorry, I'll get to it." But he never did. I tried to be patient, hoping he'd adjust, but it just kept getting worse. By the third week, Mark wasn't even pretending to job hunt anymore. He'd stay up all night, playing video games with the volume up, yelling into his headset while I was trying to sleep. He'd sleep until noon or later, and I'd come home to find him in the same spot I'd left him, snacking or lounging around. When I suggested he apply for some temporary work to make ends meet, he brushed it off, saying, "I don't want to get stuck in some dead-end gig. I'm looking for something that actually fits my skills." Meanwhile, he was going through my groceries like it was his personal pantry. I'd buy food for the week, only to find most of it gone within a couple of days. When I brought up the idea of him chipping in for groceries, he'd laugh and say, "Of course, once I get my first paycheck." But that paycheck never came because he wasn't even applying to jobs anymore. Then he started inviting friends over without asking. One Saturday, I came home from an early shift to find 2 people I'd never met lounging on my couch, drinking my coffee, and using my Wi-Fi like it was their own. I pulled Mark aside and asked him to check with me before bringing people over. He looked genuinely annoyed and said, "Wow, okay. Didn't know you were so uptight." I explained that I just liked a heads up since this was my home, but he rolled his eyes and muttered something about how I needed to relax. The last straw came when he took my car without asking. One morning, I went to grab my keys only to find they weren't there. He'd taken the car to run a quick errand, but was gone for most of the day. When he finally came back, the gas tank was almost empty, and he hadn't even mentioned taking the car. When I asked him not to take it without asking, he acted like it was no big deal, saying, "I figured you wouldn't mind. I'll refill the tank next time." But there was no next time because I'd had enough. I finally sat him down and told him that this arrangement wasn't working out as I'd hoped. I asked him to either start actively contributing or consider looking for another place soon. He looked at me, totally shocked, and then went off about how some people have no idea how hard it is out there, and that I was lucky to have it so easy. He accused me of giving up on him when he was just trying to get back on his feet, even saying I was being selfish for expecting him to pitch in. I was stunned. Here I was covering his living expenses, groceries, and everything else, and he was making me feel guilty for setting boundaries. Since that talk, things have been incredibly tense. He barely speaks to me, and when he does, it's with a snarky attitude, making passive-aggressive comments like, Must be nice to have everything all figured out, or not everyone's as lucky as you. Meanwhile, he's still leaving messes, eating through my food, and taking over my apartment like it's his. I'm honestly dreading coming home every day, feeling like a stranger in my own place. I'm torn. I wanted to help him, but now I feel like he's taking advantage of me. Part of me wonders if I was too harsh, or if I should have set boundaries earlier. But another part of me knows this can't keep going like this. AITA? Oliver has been my best friend for 13 years. I found him as a kitten, alone and crying under a dumpster in the rain. And from that day on, he's been my shadow. I named him Oliver because he reminded me of the scrappy orphan from Oliver Twist, and he lived up to the name. Scrappy, independent, but fiercely loyal. He was there with me through my worst days and my best, always curling up beside me, purring like a tiny engine, as if to remind me he'd be there no matter what. Then, last month, he started losing weight. He'd always been a big, strong cat, so it was noticeable right away. He stopped eating his usual food, then barely touched even the special treats he usually couldn't resist. I took him to the vet, my heart in my throat, hoping it was something simple, maybe just age catching up with him. But the vet gave me the news I'd been dreading. Oliver had advanced kidney disease. She told me there was no cure, but we could try managing it with subcutaneous fluids, medications, and maybe even dialysis. It might buy him time, a few months, maybe a year if he responded well. I didn't hesitate. We'll do whatever it takes, I said, willing to spend every bit of time, money, and energy I had if it meant I'd get more time with him. But my husband, Dave, was quiet on the ride home, watching Oliver curl up in his carrier, exhausted from the visit. Once we were home, he took my hand, his face etched with worry. "Are you sure about putting him through all this?" he asked gently. I love Oliver too, but he's in pain and he doesn't know what's going on. He's already so tired, and the treatments sound really intense. I felt a wave of frustration rise up. "So you think I should just give up on him?" "No," he said, squeezing my hand. "But I think we need to think about what he'd want, not just what we want. Kidney disease is hard on cats, and he's old, Emma. He might just want peace." It was like he was asking me to give up on Oliver, and that thought felt unbearable. But he's still here, Dave. He's still Oliver. I owe it to him to give him every chance. Over the next few days, I threw myself into researching everything I could find about kidney disease in cats, reading every story of cats who'd survived longer than expected, hoping Oliver would be one of the lucky ones. I showed these stories to Dave, trying to convince him that this wasn't the end, that Oliver had more fight in him. But Dave wasn't convinced. He'd listened, nodding patiently, but I could see the sadness in his eyes as he watched Oliver, who was spending more and more time sleeping, who no longer jumped up on the couch to sit beside us, who seemed more distant each day. "Emma," he said one night, his voice soft, "maybe holding on to him is more for us than for him." The words hit me hard, and I wanted to argue, to insist that fighting was the only choice, but a part of me knew he was right. I just wasn't ready to face it. So the next day, I asked him to come with me to the vet to talk through what treatment would really mean. The vet patiently explained everything: the fluids, the medications, the dialysis if we wanted to try it. "Some cats adjust well, and we can make them comfortable," she said. "But with a cat his age, it's a tough journey. You know him best, and only you can decide what's right for him." When we got home, I sat with Oliver watching him sleep, his breathing shallow, his body so small and frail in my lap. I thought about the strong, scrappy cat he'd always been, the way he'd purr so loudly he'd shake the bed, the way he'd paw at me when I came home, demanding attention. I didn't want his last days to be full of needles and pills, of vet visits and procedures he didn't understand. That night, I finally looked at Dave and told him I was ready to let Oliver go. His face softened with sympathy, and he pulled me into a hug, telling me how brave I was, that letting go was the hardest but kindest choice we could make for him. We spent Oliver's last few days giving him all the love we could. I stayed home from work, lying on the couch with him curled up beside me, giving him all the tuna he wanted, letting him nap in his favorite sunny spot by the window. Every now and then, he'd purr softly, a sound that broke my heart but reassured me that he was still there, still my Oliver, until the very end. On the day we said goodbye, the vet came to our home, and I held him close, whispering to him that he'd been the best companion I could have ever asked for, that he'd given me so much joy, that he'd always be with me. He went peacefully, his little body finally at rest. Now, every corner of the house feels empty without him. I keep expecting to see him perched by the window, to hear his purrs in the quiet hours of the night. I know, deep down, that letting him go was the right thing, that he's at peace now, free from pain. But part of me still wonders if I gave up too soon, if I could have fought a little harder, held on a little longer. So I'm here, asking AITA for letting him go instead of trying every last option. All right, here we go again. My boyfriend, Evan, and I are about 4 weeks away from moving in together. And you'd think this would be an exciting time for us. I mean, it should be, right? We've been talking about this for a while now, and we're both ready to take this step in our relationship. But here's the thing. Apparently, we have very different ideas on how to actually go about moving in. So, a bit of background. I'm a planner through and through. I've got spreadsheets, a budget tracker, a checklist broken down by day, and reminders set on my phone for important deadlines. In my mind, having everything organized means we can avoid last-minute panic and have a smooth, stress-free move. I know exactly what we need to pack, when we need to pack it, and even have a list of tasks for each week leading up to moving day. Evan, on the other hand, he's more of a we'll figure it out as we go kind of person. He keeps telling me that it'll all work out and that we shouldn't stress about the details. Our first big clash came when I showed him my carefully crafted moving timeline. I thought he'd be impressed, maybe even relieved that I'd taken so much off our plates by planning in advance. Instead, he just looked at it, laughed a little, and said, "Wow, this is a lot. Are we moving or running a military operation?" I try to keep it light. It's just a plan to keep us on track, I said, smiling. This way, we won't have to worry about anything last minute. We can just follow the schedule and be ready to go. He shrugged. Or we could just pack things up when we're closer to the date and not overcomplicate it. Moving's not that big of a deal. People do it all the time without all this. And right there, I could feel myself start to spiral. But Evan, if we don't get things set up now, we'll end up scrambling. What if we can't find movers, or we forget to set up utilities? Planning now means we're saving ourselves stress later. He just smiled like he thought I was cute for worrying about it. You're stressing yourself out before we've even started. Why not just relax and go with the flow? We don't need to have every detail nailed down weeks in advance. I get it, he has a different way of handling things, but go with the flow is the exact opposite of what I feel we need for something this big. From that point on, every time I brought up something practical, like looking at movers or sorting out which furniture we'd bring along, he'd just wave it off, saying, "We'll get to it," like there was all the time in the world. Meanwhile, I'm losing sleep, picturing us unpacking in a sea of chaos with no plan whatsoever. I even tried to find a compromise. I suggested I'd handle the logistical side, like booking the movers, setting up a packing schedule, and getting our utilities transferred. If he'd focus on the more creative things, like deciding where things should go and picking out a few new pieces for our place. I thought this was a great idea, but he just shook his head. "I don't want to just do the fun stuff," he said, crossing his arms. "This is our move. Why can't we just handle it together, but more organically?" Organically, I repeated, feeling my patience slipping. "Evan, moving is stressful enough without adding chaos. If we plan now, we'll have way less to worry about later." He sighed, clearly getting frustrated. "I just don't think it needs to be this intense. It's a move, not a life or death mission. People get through it all the time without turning it into a project." That word, intense, kept coming up. He seemed to think I was making this more stressful than it needed to be, but from my perspective, my planning was what was going to make it less stressful. I wanted us to go into moving day with as little last-minute chaos as possible. But to him, it felt like I was stripping all the spontaneity and fun out of it. Then, a few nights ago, I found a great moving company with good reviews, and they had an opening on the exact day we needed. I told him I wanted to go ahead and book it so we'd have one more thing settled. I thought he'd be happy that I was taking care of it, but instead, he looked at me like I was doing too much. "Why do we need to book movers already?" he asked. "It's still weeks away. We got time." I tried to stay calm, but I could feel my frustration bubbling up, because if we wait, we might not get a good rate, or worse, we won't find anyone available. This way, we don't have to worry about it." He sighed, looking exasperated. "You're making this way more complicated than it needs to be. If we can't find movers, we'll figure something else out. It's not like the world's going to end if we don't plan every detail in advance." We both sat there in silence for a moment, each convinced the other was completely missing the point. He wanted me to relax and enjoy the process, while I wanted him to see that planning was what would make this move smoother. To him, my lists and schedules were adding stress, while to me his laid-back approach felt like an invitation for chaos. Since then, we've tried to find a middle ground, but it's been tense. He's agreed to let me handle a few key things like booking movers and starting the packing process, but only if I promise to take it easy and not bring up the move every other day. Meanwhile, I'm secretly updating my timeline and checklist, just so I feel like we're not falling behind, even though I know it's annoying him. The other day, he even joked, "With how you're planning this, we could probably run a whole moving company," which was funny, but I could tell he didn't entirely mean it as a compliment. I know he's just trying to help me relax, and I'm doing my best to meet him halfway, but every time I try to go with the flow, I feel like I'm waiting for a bomb to go off. What if we're unprepared and end up paying double for movers because everything's booked? Or what if we arrive and realize we didn't set up basic things like internet or electricity? The thought of all those what-ifs is what keeps me glued to my planning, even if it makes me look like a control freak. So now, I'm starting to question myself. Am I being too uptight, turning something simple into a huge deal? Or is he just being too relaxed, downplaying the importance of being prepared for something this big? I thought that after all this time, the guilt would start to fade, that I'd find a way to justify missing Danny's dinner and put it behind me. But instead, it's like a quiet drumbeat in the background, getting louder every time I think about it. I've tried to convince myself that it was a small thing, that he was just being sensitive, that it shouldn't matter so much. But the truth is, it mattered to him, and I didn't care enough to be there. I can still see his message in my mind, the way he phrased it so simply. "I thought it would mean something to you to be there." That line stays with me because it cuts to the heart of everything I'd been ignoring. He thought I would care, and I let him down, thinking my presence wasn't necessary, that my absence wouldn't really make a difference. And now I'm starting to realize that maybe I've been doing that in more ways than I ever realized, assuming people don't need me because I've always thought that caring too much would make me vulnerable. It's strange because I can still remember when Danny and I were close, how we'd laugh about everything, tell each other our worst insecurities. He was always the steady one, the achiever, but he never made me feel small or less than. He was proud of his work, but he never flaunted it. And I guess, looking back, I took that humility as proof he didn't need my support. But now I see that sometimes, even the ones who seem strong want a simple show of loyalty, a reminder that they're seen, appreciated, celebrated. When I think about that night, I picture him surrounded by family, looking around, expecting me to walk in late, only to realize I wasn't coming. And that thought of him looking for me, wanting me to be there, that's what hurts the most. I can see now that my absence wasn't just a small mistake. It was a message. It told him, without words, that I didn't value his moment, his hard work, or his happiness enough to make it a priority. And that realization stings, because I always assumed I'd be the person who'd be there for people when it counted. I thought that's who I was. But now I see that maybe I've been blind to the way I've treated people. Maybe I've spent years telling myself that my time is more valuable than anyone else's, that people would always understand if I missed an event because that's just how I am. I like thinking of myself as someone who didn't need constant connection, who could show up when it mattered and that would be enough. But I can't help but wonder if that's just been an excuse to avoid putting in the effort to be there for others. I've thought about reaching out to him so many times, about trying to explain all of this, to tell him that I finally see what that night meant to him and what my absence said. But the more I think about it, the more I realize that an apology might feel hollow to him now. He asked me for something simple, to show up, to be part of a night that mattered to him, and I let him down. No words can fix the fact that I chose my own comfort over being there for him. And I'm coming to terms with the fact that sometimes there are no second chances to show people that they matter. It's ironic, really. I always thought that by keeping things casual, by not getting too invested, I was saving myself from disappointment, from getting hurt. But now I see that all I was doing was holding people at arm's length, making sure I never had to go out of my way for anyone. And the sad truth is, that kind of distance has left me exactly where I didn't want to be, regretting the choices I made, feeling like I lost someone who was actually willing to show up for me when I didn't deserve it. I've been to family gatherings since, and every time I catch a glimpse of Danny, I feel that tightness in my chest, that lingering shame. He doesn't hold it over me, doesn't make a scene, but he doesn't go out of his way to talk to me either. There's a politeness, a wall that wasn't there before. And I'm realizing that while he's moved on, I'm the one left standing in the wreckage, seeing how my selfishness has cost me something I didn't appreciate until it was gone. I think what's hardest to accept is the idea that maybe he doesn't see me as family in the same way anymore. Maybe I've become someone he no longer relies on, someone who let him down in a way that goes deeper than one missed dinner. I thought family bonds were unbreakable, that they'd be there no matter how many times I flaked or failed to show up. But I'm starting to see that even family has limits, that people can only forgive so many times before they stop waiting for you to care. I'm left with this haunting feeling that I might never get that closeness back, that I'll always be the cousin who chose her own priorities over celebrating something he'd worked his whole life for. And that's not something I can just move on from. It's something I have to carry with me as a reminder of what it really means to be there for people. So here I am, months later, still wondering if I could have done something differently, if there's a way to fix the damage I caused by simply not showing up. But maybe this is my reality now, the consequence of years of putting myself first. And maybe the only thing I can do is to learn from this, to show up better, not just for Danny, but for anyone who cares enough to invite me into their lives. Still, I can't help but wonder, at EA for not seeing what he needed from me until it was too late? Or was this just an honest mistake that went too far? My boyfriend, Ben, and I decided to throw a small welcome to fall dinner party for a few friends. We both love cooking, and fall is our favorite season. So we thought it'd be fun to celebrate with pumpkin everything, cozy lights, and hearty food. We kept the guest list small, just a few close friends who were into good food and low-key gatherings. Since we both have busy schedules, we divided up the tasks. Ben would handle the main dishes and appetizers, while I'd cover the desserts, drinks, and decor. Ben's great in the kitchen, so I had no doubts about his end, and I really enjoy putting together cute setups and making themed drinks, so I thought it was a win-win. We both promised each other we'd go all out, and I kept picturing our friends raving about the cozy, autumn vibes and leaving with full stomachs and big smiles. But as the week rolled around, we both got hit with extra work. I'd originally planned to make some fall-themed cocktails, maybe a few different options with cider and cinnamon sticks, and set up a pretty little dessert table. But with how hectic things got, I ended up picking up a few bottles of wine, some apple cider, and a store-bought pumpkin pie at the last minute. I figured it'd be fine because Ben's main dishes would carry the night, and everyone would understand the relaxed vibe once they saw our setup. When I arrived home from work on the day of the party, I noticed that the dining table was bare. No centerpiece, no candles, no cute little touches that we talked about. Ben was still in the kitchen chopping vegetables, and from what I could see, he'd only made a small pot of soup. I felt a bit of panic start to creep in. Ben, where's the rest of the food? I asked, trying to sound casual. He gave me a distracted look, still chopping. What do you mean? I'm making soup, and I got a baguette. I thought you'd be handling, the rest. I stared at him, dumbfounded. The rest? Ben, we said we'd do a full fall feast. Soup and bread aren't exactly a feast, especially when we invited everyone expecting dinner. He paused, his face scrunching up. Wait, I thought we were keeping it casual. Besides, didn't you say you'd take care of the vibe and drinks? Where's all the fall decor you were so excited about? I looked around the table at my sad contributions, a couple of wine bottles, the cider, and a store-bought pie. Suddenly, our plan of a cozy fall feast was looking more like a thrown-together potluck. I started to feel embarrassed, but also a bit annoyed. Well, I thought you'd at least have, a couple more dishes ready. I barely had time to grab these drinks, and I thought you'd have the main part of the dinner down. Ben's face fell, and I could see his frustration. And I thought you'd be doing more than a pie and a couple of wine bottles. We agreed on a fall setup, remember? We ended up going back and forth. each of us realizing just how little effort we'd both put in. The doorbell rang before we could finish arguing, so we had to put on fake smiles and act natural as our friends came in. Our friends, bless them, were kind enough not to comment on the lackluster spread, but I could tell they were surprised. They'd arrived expecting a cozy, elaborate dinner, and instead we had them huddled around a single pot of soup with slices of bread on the side and nothing remotely fall-themed about the table setup. One friend half-jokingly asked if this was a soup tasting, and Ben and I just exchanged tight smiles, feeling the awkwardness settle over the room. By the end of the night, I could barely look Ben in the eye. We'd promised ourselves this would be a night to remember, and it ended up being memorable for all the wrong reasons. After everyone left, we started cleaning up in silence, and finally, I turned to him, feeling both guilty and annoyed. "I just don't get why you didn't follow through. You're usually so good at these things," I muttered. He scoffed, not looking at me. "Oh, so this is my fault? You said you were going all out on drinks and decor, and it looked like you barely tried. I thought I was just filling in the gaps." The tension between us was thick. I knew we'd both been lazy about it, but I couldn't bring myself to admit it. I just muttered a half-hearted apology, and he did the same. We barely spoke for the rest of the night, both of us too stubborn to take full responsibility for the flop. Now, I can't stop wondering if maybe I'm the one who should have put in more effort. AITA? It all started with a rubber chicken. My office friend Sarah and I have always had a light-hearted rivalry going on, with the occasional prank here and there. It was all innocent, like swapping our coffee mugs or leaving silly notes in each other's planners. But one morning, I found an old, squeaky rubber chicken on my desk with a note that read, "For when you need a laugh." It was so random and weird that I burst out laughing, thinking, all right, challenge accepted. So I hid the rubber chicken in her desk drawer, propping it up so that it would squeak the moment she pulled it open. Sure enough, 5 minutes later, she opened her drawer, and I heard her let out a little shriek followed by a muttered, "Oh, you're dead." But she was laughing, so I figured she'd appreciate the joke. The next day, I found a reserved parking sign taped to my desk chair with a detailed sketch of a rubber chicken on it and a note that said, "Official Chicken Manager." I laughed, and everyone else in the office thought it was funny too, but I couldn't let her have the last word. So I took it up a notch. I found a recording of loud chicken clucks, loaded it onto my phone, and then set it to play every 10 minutes. I tucked my phone under some papers on her desk while she was in a meeting and waited. She came back, and within minutes, the first round of clucking started. She stopped, looked around, but couldn't find where it was coming from. By the third cluck session, she was scouring her desk, checking every drawer, but she couldn't figure it out. Finally, she found my phone and gave me a look that could melt steel. "You're gonna regret this," she said, laughing, but with a glint in her eye that told me she was serious. The next morning, I came in to find my entire desk covered in tiny rubber chickens. I mean, dozens of them on my computer, in my coffee cup, under my keyboard, in my pencil holder. It looked like the world's weirdest chicken farm. I couldn't help but laugh, and I thought, all right, she's got me. This is pretty funny, but I couldn't just let it end there. So I devised what I thought would be a hilarious prank. I made a fake company memo that announced our office would be starting Chicken Fridays, where everyone would have to wear a chicken-themed accessory to promote team bonding. I even signed it with our boss's name and posted it in the break room, hoping she'd believe it, at least for a minute. The memo caused a bit of a stir. People were asking each other if it was real, and Sarah's face turned bright red when she saw it. She looked genuinely worried, muttering about how this can't be serious. When I told her it was a prank, she laughed, but her laugh had a hint of menace. "You just wait," she said, narrowing her eyes. The next day, I opened my email and found that she'd signed me up for a chicken enthusiast newsletter that sent multiple emails a day about all things chicken. Recipes, facts, even chicken-themed merchandise. My inbox was flooded. No matter how many times I unsubscribed, the emails just kept coming from new addresses. She thought it was hilarious, and I had to admit it was clever. But at this point, we were both committed to winning, and I wasn't going to back down. So I went for the big guns. I printed out a fake Employee of the Month certificate with Sarah's name on it and a giant, ridiculous rubber chicken graphic. I taped it to the bulletin board in the break room for everyone to see, thinking she'd get a laugh out of it. Instead, she looked mortified. I hadn't realized she'd been hoping for an actual Employee of the Month recognition, and now everyone was congratulating her on her award with winks and smiles, thinking it was real. She pulled me aside later, visibly annoyed, and said, "You know, some of us actually want to be taken seriously here." I felt bad, but by then people were treating the whole thing as a running joke, so I didn't think it was that big of a deal. The next morning, I came into work only to find my entire cubicle coated in shredded paper confetti. Every inch of my desk, my chair, my keyboard, my coffee cup, it was all buried in a mountain of confetti. I was stunned. It took me hours to clean up, and the whole time, Sarah watched from her desk, a tiny, satisfied smirk on her face. At this point, I was livid. I'd spent half my morning digging myself out from under confetti, and the joke had started to wear thin. But I wasn't about to give up now, so I decided to go all out with one last prank. I filled her cubicle drawers with bags of popcorn kernels and placed a couple of hair dryers taped to the on position inside the drawers. The idea was that when she opened a drawer, the hair dryers would blow, scattering the popcorn kernels everywhere. But something went wrong. When she opened her drawer, the bag of popcorn kernels fell over, spilling everywhere, and one of the hair dryers started overheating. She quickly unplugged it before anything serious happened. But by then, her desk was littered with popcorn kernels, and she looked genuinely shaken. She shot me an icy glare, and I could tell the prank had backfired. I tried to apologize, but she brushed past me, saying, "Don't. It's done." From that point on, things got really awkward. Our co-workers stopped laughing, and Sarah barely spoke to me for the rest of the week. The whole thing had gone too far, and now I felt like I was the office idiot who didn't know when to stop. Even the boss heard about it and gave me a stern talk about professional conduct, which just added to the embarrassment. Now, things are tense between Sarah and me. We used to laugh together and play around, but now she avoids me, and I feel like the whole office is still looking at me like some kind of prank-crazed maniac. I keep wondering if I pushed too hard, or if maybe she just couldn't take a joke in the end. So, AITA? My husband, Tom, has been working nonstop for months. He's in a high-stress job, and it's been deadline after deadline, late nights, weekends, you name it. He's been coming home looking exhausted, barely eating, barely sleeping, and it's like he's just worn thin. I hate seeing him like that, so I decided to do something special to show him he's appreciated and that he could finally take a breather. Without telling him, I arranged a weekend trip for the two of us to a cabin up in the mountains. I took care of everything, booked the cabin, arranged for a dog sitter, packed up his favorite snacks, and even told his boss he'd be out of reach for a couple of days. I wanted him to have zero stress about logistics and just be able to show up and relax. The plan was to surprise him after work on Friday, drive up, and spend the weekend completely unplugged, just the two of us. So Friday night rolls around, and when he walked in, I greeted him with a big grin and said, "Guess what? We're going on a weekend getaway. Everything's packed, and we leave in half an hour." At first, he just stared at me, completely blank. Then he said, "Wait, what?" I told him all about the cabin, the cozy setup, and how it'd be just us away from all the work stress. But instead of the excitement I expected, he just looked annoyed. "You planned this without asking me?" he said, his face falling. I laughed, trying to keep things light. "Well, yeah, I wanted it to be a surprise. I know how stressed you've been, and I thought this would be the perfect way to help you relax." But he shook his head, clearly not happy. "You told my boss I'd be out of reach? You realize I had projects lined up for this weekend. I can't just disappear. People are counting on me." I felt the excitement drain out of me. "Tom, you're exhausted. You've been burning yourself out, and I thought this would be a chance to just take a break. You always say you need some time to unwind." He ran a hand through his hair, looking more frustrated. "Yeah, I know I've been busy, but you should have talked to me first. This just feels like you decided what was best for me without even asking if I wanted it." I tried to explain. "I thought if I asked, you'd feel pressured to say no, or you'd try to make excuses about work. I just wanted you to relax, to get away from all of it for a couple of days." He sighed, looking down. "I appreciate the thought, really, but this isn't what I needed right now. I've got a ton on my plate, and now I'll have to spend next week catching up. It feels like you're just adding stress instead of taking it away." That hit hard. Here I was thinking I'd done something amazing, something he'd love, and now he was making it sound like I'd made things worse. I didn't mean to add stress. I thought this would help you feel better. That's all. He softened a bit, but still looked tired. I get it, I do. But next time, please just talk to me. I know you're trying to help, but this makes me feel like you don't really understand what I'm going through. I didn't know what else to say. I'd put so much into planning this, hoping it would show him how much I cared, but instead, it felt like I'd completely misjudged what he needed. In the end, he didn't want to go, so I unpacked the bags and watched him spend the weekend catching up on work instead, feeling more distant than ever. Now I'm left wondering if I should have just let him be, or if I was wrong for wanting to give him a break. Alright, here's how loaning $400 to my friend Chris has somehow turned into the most uncomfortable situation of my life. Chris and I have been friends for years, the kind of friendship where we cover for each other in a pinch without even thinking about it. So, when he asked to borrow $400 to get him through a rough patch with his bills, I didn't hesitate. He assured me it would only be a couple of weeks until he'd pay me back, just a little help to tide him over. I figured, no big deal, he'd do the same for me if I needed it. But those couple of weeks turned into a month, then 2 months, and nothing. At first, I didn't push it because I knew he was still dealing with some stuff and I didn't want to be that friend. But soon, I started seeing posts of his nights out, dinners at nice restaurants, a music festival he'd gone to, and even a weekend getaway. Meanwhile, I was cutting back myself because $400 is a good chunk of change, and I was expecting to have it back by now. After 2 months, I finally decided to say something. I sent him a quick text, something like, "Hey, think you'll be able to start paying me back soon?" He replied saying, "Totally, man. I haven't forgotten, just still getting things sorted." I told myself to be patient, but every time I saw him posting about his latest outing or big purchase, it started to wear on me. Finally, about a month later, I texted again, this time more directly. "Chris, I could really use that loan back soon. Do you think you could at least send part of it?" He took a day to respond and finally replied with, "I get it, but things are still tight. I just need a bit more time." Then came the breaking point. We had a mutual friend's birthday dinner, and Chris showed up with this huge gift, talking about how he couldn't resist and wanted to go big. Throughout the night, he was ordering top-shelf drinks and sharing all these plans about upcoming concerts and trips he had booked. I sat there, biting my tongue, feeling like I was financing his lifestyle while I was stuck on a budget. Toward the end of the night, after a few drinks, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I leaned over and said, "Hey Chris, if you could do all this, maybe you could think about starting to pay me back." The look on his face was like I just insulted him in front of everyone. He pulled me aside and said, "Really, man? You're going to ask me that here?" He accused me of making him feel embarrassed and said I should understand that he'd pay me back when he could. I told him I wasn't trying to make a scene, but it had been months and it didn't seem like he was making an effort. He shot back, "If it was such a big deal, you shouldn't have lent it to me." Since that night, things between us have been tense. He's been distant, and I keep hearing from mutual friends that he thinks I was out of line for bringing it up at dinner. Some of them even told me to let it go since it's just money and to be patient. Meanwhile, I'm left feeling like I'm in the wrong for even asking, even though I waited months and kept it private as long as I could. So now I'm wondering, was I wrong for bringing it up, or is he just avoiding responsibility? When my family found out I wasn't coming home for Thanksgiving, the call started almost immediately. First, my mom, with her slightly passive-aggressive tone, the kind that let me know she was disappointed, but wasn't ready to fight about it yet. Then my dad, with his casual, "We just miss you, kiddo," as if he hadn't heard me say it the first 3 times. And finally, my sister, who skipped right past guilt and went straight into full-on disbelief. "Wait, you're serious?" she said, incredulous, as though I just announced I was giving up on Thanksgiving for life. "You're really not coming?" "I know," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "But I just need a break this year. It's been a lot, and I'd like to try spending Thanksgiving here, just doing my own thing." My own thing. Those 3 words seemed to trigger an invisible alarm. To them, Thanksgiving wasn't just about turkey and pie. It was our biggest family tradition. The one non-negotiable holiday where we'd pile into my parents' house, argue over mashed potatoes, watch the same old movies, and feel like kids again, no matter how far apart life had scattered us the rest of the year. Saying I was opting out felt like saying I was opting out of them. "What's going on, though?" my sister asked, her tone softer now, the worry creeping in. "You've never wanted to skip Thanksgiving before." Are you okay? I sighed, not sure how to explain. It's not that I'm not okay. It's just, I feel like I need some time to myself. I haven't had a chance to slow down, and the idea of traveling, dealing with the whole holiday thing, the big production, it's just not what I need right now. She was quiet, and I could picture her brow furrowing, trying to understand. We're family, though. This is what we do. You've been part of this tradition since forever, and it's weird to think of you not being there. I bit my lip, knowing exactly what she meant. But this year had been exhausting. Between work stress, personal stuff, and just the endless demands of adulthood, I felt like I was running on fumes. And I knew that if I went home, I'd end up slipping into the same old patterns, the same pressures to be the happy one, the fun one, the one who kept the peace. I wanted, for once, to just rest. Look, it's not that I don't love you guys, I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. I just feel like I need to recharge on my own terms. I don't want to let anyone down, but I need to do this for me. The silence on her end was deafening, and I could tell she didn't know what to say. Family was everything to us, and in her eyes, choosing solitude over our biggest tradition probably felt like a betrayal. Finally, she let out a sigh. Well, okay. I mean, it's your choice. But Mom and Dad are really going to take this hard. You know how much they look forward to this. It's one of the few times everyone's together. The guilt weighed on me, pulling me back toward the familiar sense of obligation. I knew she was right. My parents had spent years building these traditions, and they loved nothing more than gathering all of us under one roof. But I also knew that going back would mean sacrificing the tiny shred of calm I'd fought so hard to hold on to. I'll call them, I promised. I'll explain. I don't want them to feel abandoned. I just need them to understand that this is what's right for me, just for this year. The rest of our call was polite, but the warmth was gone. I knew she was hurt, and I could picture the conversation she'd have with my parents, telling them that I wasn't coming, that I'd chosen to stay behind. They'd be disappointed, maybe even a little hurt, and that knowledge weighed on me, heavier than I'd expected. A few days later, my mom called, her tone quiet and careful. We just wanted you to know that we're here if you change your mind. You know how much this means to us. I know, Mom, I said, my throat tightening. I'll miss you guys, and I'm not doing this to hurt anyone. I just need some time to myself. She sighed, and I could feel her sadness over the line. Well, you're still part of this family, no matter what. We'll just miss you, that's all. The weight of her words stayed with me. I'd spent my whole life trying to be the person who showed up, who kept everyone happy, who fit into the roles they'd come to expect. And now, choosing something for myself felt like the ultimate act of selfishness. But I couldn't ignore the part of me that felt stretched too thin, the part that needed a break from being everything to everyone. Thanksgiving Day came, and I spent it quietly, making a small meal, watching old movies, and reading a book. I could feel the emptiness in my apartment, the quiet that was both a comfort and a reminder of what I was missing. I knew my family was together, laughing, arguing, creating memories, and while I felt a pang of regret, I also felt a strange sense of relief, a feeling that I was finally listening to what I needed. Later that night, my phone buzzed with a text from my sister. We missed you today. Hope you had a good day, though. Love you. I sat there, staring at the screen, my heart aching with the mixed emotions that had been building up for weeks. I wondered if I'd made a mistake, if I'd let them down in a way that couldn't be mended. But I also knew that, for the first time, I'd chosen to honor my own needs, even if it meant stepping away from tradition. Now, sitting here alone, with the quiet settling around me, I keep wondering if I should have gone. If putting my own needs first was worth the cost of missing a day that had always meant so much to us. A couple of months ago, my cousin Lily reached out, saying she was having a tough time. We'd been close when we were younger, but we'd drifted apart. She was always the adventurous one, moving to new cities, trying new jobs, living life on her own terms. But it hadn't worked out this time. She'd lost her job, couldn't make rent, and was feeling overwhelmed. She asked if she could stay with me just for a few weeks until she found a job and got back on her feet. I was a bit hesitant, but family is family. I thought if I were in her situation, I'd want someone to help me too. I agreed, cleaned out the guest room, stocked up on food, and even picked up a few essentials so she wouldn't have to worry about anything right away. When she arrived, She was super grateful, saying I was a lifesaver and promising she'd be gone in a few weeks tops. The first week went smoothly. Lily was up early, out every day, saying she was dropping off applications and talking to recruiters. We'd have dinner together, and she'd tell me about all the places she was looking at and how she was sure she'd find something soon. It was nice to have someone to talk to, and I was happy to see her making an effort. I even helped her edit her resume and sent her job listings that I thought she'd like. But by the second week, her routine changed. She started sleeping in later, sometimes until noon, and when I came home from work, she'd be on the couch in her pajamas, watching TV or scrolling through her phone. When I asked about her job search, she'd sigh and say, "I'm waiting to hear back from a few places." I tried suggesting she keep applying in the meantime, but she brushed it off, saying, "I don't want to look desperate. You know how it is." Then there was the mess. I'd come home to find dirty dishes in the sink, food wrappers on the coffee table, and random items scattered around the apartment. She'd leave makeup and clothes all over the bathroom, and every time I asked her to tidy up, she'd laugh it off, saying, "Oh, I know, I'm the worst." But she never actually cleaned up. It started to feel like I was taking care of a messy teenager. By the end of week 3, it was clear she'd stopped job hunting altogether. She'd stay up late watching TV with the volume turned up, then sleep until the afternoon. I'd come home to find her exactly where I'd left her in the morning, surrounded by snacks and empty cups. When I gently suggested looking into part-time work to start saving money, she sighed and said, "I can't waste my time on something that won't lead anywhere. I'm aiming higher." Meanwhile, she was going through groceries faster than I could stock them. I'd buy food for the week, only to find it gone within a couple of days. When I asked if she could start contributing for groceries, she said, "Of course, once I get my first paycheck." But with no job, that paycheck wasn't exactly on the horizon. Then there was the car. One morning, I got up to find my keys missing. I texted her, and she replied saying she'd borrowed the car for a quick errand. She didn't come back for hours, and when she did, the gas tank was almost empty. When I asked her not to take my car without asking, she rolled her eyes and said, "Seriously? It's just a car. I figured you wouldn't mind." She promised to refill the tank, but never did. The last straw was when she started inviting friends over without asking. I came home one evening to find 2 people I didn't know lounging on my couch, eating snacks I'd bought, like they lived there. When I asked Lily to give me a heads up before bringing people over, she seemed genuinely offended, saying, "They're just friends. I thought you'd be cool with it." I explained that it was my home and I wanted to know who was coming over, but she just muttered something about me being a little uptight. By week 5, I'd reached my breaking point. I sat her down and told her we needed to talk seriously about her plan to move forward. I asked her to start actively looking for work and contributing to household expenses, or to start thinking about finding another place. She looked shocked, then angry. She accused me of bailing on her when she was at her lowest. She went on about how some people don't know what it's like to struggle, and that I was privileged for having a stable job and a place to live. I was floored. I'd opened my home, covered all the groceries and bills, and even helped her with her resume. I explained that I wasn't trying to rush her out, just that I needed her to start showing some effort. She scoffed, saying, "Wow, I didn't realize there was a timeline on family helping family." She stormed off to her room, and since then, she's been barely speaking to me. Now, every time we talk, she makes snide comments like, "Must be nice to have it all figured out," or "Not everyone has it as easy as you." Meanwhile, she's still leaving messes, inviting friends over, and treating my home like it's hers. I'm starting to feel like a stranger in my own place, and I'm at a loss. I wanted to help, but now I feel completely taken advantage of. Part of me wonders if I was too harsh, or if I should have been more patient. But another part of me knows I can't keep living like this. So, AITA?